am Christine Brookins, and this is Connecting Our Community. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with my friend Katey Davern about an ADHDable life. Katey, thanks for joining me today.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
So, just to let folks know how you and I know one another, essentially, we had worked together at a prior firm. And my recollection is that you were always that nice lady up on stage that was making us all laugh and teaching us all the great ways to grow our businesses. But I think a lot of that, while it's probably genuine Katey, is also what comes out of your education and your background. Is that so?
Yeah, that's pretty spot on. And also probably being the third of four children and desperately seeking attention. So any chance I could get up on stage, I was like, I'll do it. I'll do it.
Being one of five, I do understand that myself.
Yes.
It's all good.
Good.
So we want to tell people about an ADHDable life, but to start with that, I'll just a little bit of groundwork is for our audience. We are discussing ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And if you want to go textbook or look at what Google says about it, marked by impulsivity, inability to concentrate, hyperactivity, but that's not necessarily Katie. So maybe if we start with the Katie journey
Yeah,
and where you are and how you got to be on this path. Can you tell
you
us a little
bet.
bit about that?
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you say it in that way that what ADHD was marked by, but that's not necessarily Katie. And it's spot on because if you have met one person with an ADHD brain, you've met one person with an ADHD brain. And the same
Absolutely.
goes for all neurodivergencies. And my particular flavor of it, I was originally diagnosed with inattentive. There are three types. They say inattentive type, hyperactivity type, or both. And if you're sitting at home and going, wait, is ADHD the same as ADD? Yes. I think it was a couple of decades ago, the medical community just smushed the two together. They are the same thing. So for me, like I said, I'm the third of four children. I've always been a high performer, but also throughout my life, but also had this kind of sneaking suspicion like, I'm not good enough. I'm not quite meeting my potential. I feel like there's something more out there for me. I don't know quite know what it is. And there were a lot of times when, a lot of kids experience this, but you feel like you have the answer, and so you blurt it out instead of raising your hand, and then you get shushed from it or shamed from it, and all of that stuff presses down on you, and then you become
Sure.
adult and go, "Whoops, I didn't deal with any of that." And it's not uncommon for women in particular. One little fun fact I've learned over the last couple of years is the current age that a boy gets diagnosed with ADHD is 8, and the current age for a girl is 36.
Wow.
Mhm. Which is
Wow.
pretty interesting. And it's spot on for a couple of reasons. One, oftentimes just we're going to talk in general genders, but women, girls tend to present far differently in boys. They don't look like the stereotype that you grew up, at least we grew up in the 80s and 90s learning about. And then women, we grow up and we're high performing, we're high functioning, we have kids, we can do it all. I can't believe we're doing it all. And then at some point in time, we crash and go, I can't understand why I'm crashing. And oftentimes the trend is you go in and you seek therapy and they start to treat you for depression, and you do a little bit more, and then they kind of back it up and go, well, I think you have anxiety, which is probably contributing towards your depression. And then you go in a little bit more and you get on TikTok and you start seeing your For You page feeding you all of this neurodivergent ADHD content, and you think, huh, a lot of that sounds like me. And that was a big part of my journey, as well as I have two kids. And when the shutdown happened with COVID, I noticed some ADHD tension symptoms in my youngest. He was fourth grade, third, fourth grade, trying to manage asynchronous learning. So on his device, and I thought, oh my God, my poor kiddo. And meanwhile, all of my structure was gone. And I was like, this is
Right.
amazing. I have the freedom to work from home. But like, why can't I function? And why can't I get into the shower? And why can't I make a meal on time? And it took a while, but it was when my son finally got diagnosed that the doctor, the neuropsych doctor, turns around and says, okay, this is the time in the diagnosis where I turn around and look at one or both of you. It's very likely one or both of you is neurodivergent in some way, and it's very genetic, a lot of genetic strength. So that really started my whole journey. And I was officially diagnosed at 41. I'm 45 now. And I just got to a point in my work life where I wasn't doing the on-stage stuff as much. I wasn't doing the things I loved as much. And I had an opportunity to go, you know what? Instead of kind of falling into things that I I'm good at because I'm multi-passionate and can do a lot of different things, I'm going to actually apply what I learned about my brain and how it works and then really take a hard look at my own values and my own interests and try to build a portfolio career and a life that I really love. And for me, that meant understanding how the world works and understanding how my brain works are two different things. And so if I wanted to live a more harmonious life, I needed to make it ADHDable for myself. So that's what I came up with. And now I'm launched a business called Neuro Nuance. Right now, I'm on the LinkedIn side of the house and I still do marketing consulting, but I
Okay.
do it in a totally different consulting experience, one that feeds my creativity and my leans into my hyperactivity. So I sprint to do projects for customers and clients. And then the TikTok side of the house, I am at, I think, 34,000 followers. So over the
Good for
last
you.
4 months, from October to December, I started posting finally. I got over my cringe and said, I'm just going to start talking about this because I want to help other people and make information to brain information, or excuse me, I wanted to make access to the information about how our brains work relatable to life and then apply what I was working towards in my brain coaching certification and do something fun. So it's very exciting.
I love it. And I
Yeah.
love that, you know, as you mentioned, each person is very different and unique. There are going to be traits. That's how any diagnosis of any condition comes about, right?
Yep.
But I think the concept that you saw behaviors in your own child that were of concern, and that in that process of a diagnosis and recognizing like the familiarity of, hey, those things I can get behind,
Yeah.
um, but also recognizing they're very different. Because, like you said, I, I know myself at the beginning of COVID, my introverted family members, very few, were like, yay, I've been practicing for this all my life. And my extroverted family members, myself included, and many others, were like, I can't stand not seeing people.
Hmm.
But what you mentioned was around structure.
Yeah.
It sounded like you were like, yay, I don't have structure. But then we're wondering what to do without the structure.
Yes, and that is the ADHD brain in a nutshell. It wants both sides of the coin. It wants to eat its cake and have it too. So I've had to come up with this concept I call flexible structure, where
Okay.
even as I say, for when I work with customer or clients that are independent entrepreneurs, I say the great news is when you become independent, you get to make all your own decisions. The bummer
Very true.
is you have to make all your own decisions. And that's what flexible structure means to me is that I, as an ADHDer, have learned, and I believe this to my core, that the only real habit I have is breathing. It's habits for the neurodivergent brain just don't exist. Habits are things that we do subconsciously without even thinking of them.
Okay.
And so what I had to do was create routines and then create systems inside those routines that work for my brain. And there's simple things like I didn't realize I had so much I didn't realize so many of my ADHD symptoms showed up in the bathroom, in particular in showering. trying to keep a facial routine, brushing my teeth. And it seems so simple, but there is a host of challenges in that for a neurodivergent brain. Number one, the tasks are ridiculously boring. Number two, the task is not just one task, it's about 642 actual mini tasks inside the thing.
Yes,
Then number three, if you add it on, even particular for women, it's like, well, am I going to blow dry my hair? Am I going to keep it curly? Am I going to wear makeup? Am I going to do the full shower or the half shower or the small shower? Um, and then there's a sensory component into it. So just to try to convince yourself to go from being warm and cozy to suddenly cold to suddenly being shocked with hot water. And then you know when you turn off the shower, you're going to be freezing again. It's like, I can't do that to myself. But we grow up not knowing that that's our brain is giving us those challenges.
sure.
But what we're hearing as we grow up is, oh, you could just get in the shower. Oh, it's not that hard. Oh. So we have these negative judgments from the people around us, even the ones that love us.
Right.
And imagine, if they would have come to us at a different angle, which is what I do with my kids now, which is like, hey, buddy, I know it can be really challenging to get into the shower. What do you want to do to try to make it ADHDable for you? And so he's got a timer now, and he's got a cool light that he turns on, and it makes it kind of look like space in the bathroom.
Okay.
Just simple things. People play music. I'm very big on scents. I always like to have products that smell amazing. So it feels like a little treat of luxury when I'm in there. So yes, identifying how the brain works and how understanding the common symptoms as they show up in your daily life on ADHD is a big part of it. And another part is understanding how the world works compared to your brain works. And we had to think of it a different way.
Well, I think from a lot of the things you said, I think of recognizing. You recognized behaviors in your son, but then you recognized similarities in yourself, and then recognizing the 642 steps that you consider for a shower versus the person that's like, just do it.
Yeah, right.
Um, and you have to recognize all of those things. And then it sounds like after you recognize all of that, now you're assessing it. Okay,
Yes.
well, how can I, like you said, how much am I doing once I get in there? And what can I do differently? And just that assessment of what is it going to take for motivation?
Mhm.
What is it going to take just literally to get through something? And I think that many people don't consciously pay attention to those things, right?
Right.
So it
Yeah.
sounds like you have learned to consciously recognize and then assess what needs to be done. What comes after that, though?
Yeah.
That's
S-
two steps out of, well,
yes.
642 maybe?
Right.
But
Well,
then what's next after you kind of assess the situation?
yep. So for me, so I think about assessment a lot like self-awareness. There is a trigger of some sort that makes you go, oh, I'm struggling with this. And I'm experiencing an emotion from this or a challenge in this. And why is that? So for me, I've always been a naturally curious person. And I think that that has helped me in particular with my kids and myself. But what for me then came second was, okay, I'm having my own challenges. I realize that it's in the lack of structure. I'm not quite sure yet how I pinpoint them, but how do I describe this? So for me, words are currency. A language is currency. And when my son was diagnosed, then I had to go. I mean, he was in the room with us, but then you kind of have to keep reinforcing it and talking about it. So
Right.
I came up with this way to describe it to him in a really visual way. And I studied marketing communications in college. I minored in journalism. Words, words, words are my friends. And the concept is this. If you think of a square and you think of a circle, we are not trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. You have to think of it visually on top of each other. So if you
Okay.
picture a square, and I will literally close my eyes when I do this. If you picture a square and then you take a circle and you put the circle on top of the square, you are going to have gaps where the circle doesn't come all the way to the edge corner of the square. And you're going to have excess where the circle just comes on the outside of the square's line. And then you're going to have the spot in the middle, which I call where the hope lives. This is this is kind of a balanced, aligned, or an ADHDable life where you are in alignment with how the world works, how your brain works, and you are actively using all the systems and the routines you've built over the years. Those coping mechanisms that are healthy instead of the unhealthy ones. And so for me, I looked at it and I was explaining that to my son. And I said, so for me, one of my gaps is never paying my bills on time. Now, is it never? No. Does it feel like that because I grew up in a household that was like, don't ever have any debt, always pay your bills on time. So if I ever miss a bill or I withdraw over zero or something in my checking account, I feel such shame about it. So I actually use twice as much cognitive energy to try to avoid those moments in my gaps, which is not sustainable because you cannot continue to live there like that. So
Exhausting.
it's exhausting. Yes. And so you come up with systems and routines. Now everyone loves to tell me like, oh, well, why don't you just sign up for auto pay? Nope. You know why? Because then I'm going to forget that I did that. That's also in ADHD. Oh, why don't you just sign up for e-wireless bills or no, what's that? Electronic bills. Nope. I need the physical bill
The paper.
to
Gotta have
come
it.
up to be my visual cue. So I have learned over the years what I need to do for me particular to survive that gap. Now, the excess is really interesting. So, the excess is where, like Steve Jobs, thank you so much for the iPhone. This is where innovation and creativity live. It's where I love to live, where all my ideas are bouncing left and right, and I'm feeling my best creatively. However, I also can't live there all the time because I am using so much energy. It's a version of my hyperfocus. But if I spend all day in hyperfocus and I don't take breaks, drink water, eat protein, I will be exhausted for the next 2 days. And that I had to learn over time and have a pattern. So now the way that I live in that space is I control it. And I use my little timer. It's my little cube timer. It has 3, 10 minute, 30 minute, 60 minutes. It's always on my desk. And I will use that plus my earphones, my noise canceling headphones, and then I put on brown noise for my brain to just hear like a little low, it's like a low volume. Actually, it's a lower tone of white noise.
Okay.
And that's when I know if I have to do work or I'm in a sprint day for a client, then I will chunk my day into 60 or 90-minute hyper focus modes. And when the timer goes off, I have to keep that boundary with myself where I get up, I go, I take the dog outside, I get 15 minutes of air, and maybe I might eat something or get a different, refresh my water. But that helps me really balance that area of excess. And so then the other balanced part where the circle and the square are overlapping just fine with no issue. This is where you're going through life, where if you're a kid, your life is school or college. If you're an adult, it's work. And you really don't have any issues with how the world works and how your brain works. And you're not going to notice those often because there's not as much disruption in your life.
Okay.
So that's my circle square analogy, and you'll see it, it's actually right in my logo. And it's one of those things that whenever I tell someone about it, they go, oh yeah, I get it. So I thought,
Yeah.
okay, that's worth using in my logo, and hopefully it's an analogy everybody can use in their lives because I found it helped me and it helps my kids, and I put it in my coaching program with a complimentary worksheet where people can actually go through and go, what are my gaps and what are my excesses? That's helpful.
I like that. And I
Yeah.
think that, again, recognizing it is the first part of it and being able to assess what's in the square, what's in the circle, where are those gaps, where is the excess. I love that you leverage the excess and control the gaps because, after all, we should all be doing that.
Yeah.
But I guess perhaps someone that's not living with ADHD, their experience of that might be simpler.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. One of my videos on TikTok that the kids say popped off. So I think it's got a million. It's over, no. I have one that's over a million views, which is
Okay.
really about showering. And people, the comments are all like, I thought it was just me, which is awesome to have that type of, I recognize myself in this, I'm not alone. The
Right.
other one, the other one which cracks me up is we were leaving an Airbnb and I saw a shower. You know, the showers that you have a shower curtain, you pull from left to right. We've all gotten into them or used them at some point. And I thought, oh, it might be kind of funny to see what the TikTok world thinks about this. So I posted it and I said, I just want the internet's help in understanding something. If you've ever showered in a shower like this before, which way do you get in? Like I've turned on the water already. Do you pull the shower and get right into the stream? Or do
No.
you, I see? Do you go around to the back and scoot
Yes.
to the back? Yeah. So the majority of comments are like, in the back, oh my God, who's going directly into the stream?
Right?
Yes. And then there's a couple people who are like, jump, I get right into the stream. I don't see what the problem is. And I'm just like, I want to be your friend. I want to study you. I want you in my life just for the balance of my eccentricities.
Yes.
So, but that's what's interesting to me about the brain.
Well, and if you take the time to break it down, what you just said about, which way do you get into the shower?
Yeah.
Most people in doing it don't think about how anybody else does it.
Right.
Of course, everybody does it the same way I do it. It's the right way to do it.
Hmm.
There are probably so many things in life that are very similar that you don't consider it, but it sounds like you've broken it down to the extent that you recognize if this is something that is just classic ADHD,
Yeah.
that no one else pays any attention to this, but to me, it's a big deal.
Correct. Correct. And that's why in the showering example, it's interesting because so many people will say, I didn't realize this was ADHD, or this is an ADHD. And I'm like, oh, just a moment. It is, it can very much be just like how you were taught as a kid, if you were
Sure,
taught how to get into the shower,
sure.
but it's very sensory dependent. And if you are neurodivergent, you very likely have sensory issues. And if you have any sensory issues, you're very likely a little neurodivergent. So it's a journey for everybody, I think, to kind of look at their life with these new glasses on to go, wow, I did not realize that I do that way because of how my brain works.
Right,
I think that's really important in a late diagnosis because there's a lot of grief in being a late diagnosed person, especially if you grew up with a lot of guilt and shame over your behaviors being bad or wrong or disruptive. So I look at it a lot like um, I don't think this is a hot take. However, I like to preface it with that because the medical community will oftentimes say, well, childhood ADHD is at a blank rate. Adult
sure.
ADHD is on the rise at a rate. And the way I look at it is there is no childhood ADHD, there is no adult ADHD. You are born with an ADHD brain. It is genetically hardwired. That's how you start. And there's research to back that up. The only thing that's different is if you took a timeline of your life from 0 to 100 is when were you diagnosed? And how did you grow up socially, economically? Did you have support? Did you not? And so if you were diagnosed at 8, a lot of the people who I see in my comments or who will send me a direct message are like, I was diagnosed at 8, I was on meds, I went off them in my 20s, now I don't know what to do. And you kind of, as an adult, have to rediscover your diagnosis in a new way. And if you're diagnosed as an adult, you can look back and really struggle with that feeling of, oh man, could my life have been different? Could I have achieved more if I had had a diagnosis earlier? And a very simple way to look at it is I grew up always with curly hair like yours naturally. And and it's really thick, and I never knew how to do it. My mom didn't know how to do it, so I always had a big frizz ball. And I just would look at these girls with thin, straight, beautiful hair. I'm like, that's all I want. And now as an adult, I mean, I've learned how to do it, both curly and straight. But I look back and go, oh, that's kind of it. Is you are always wishing or thinking that there's something a little different out there that you're like, something doesn't fit right or sit right with me, and I can't put my finger on it until I figure out how my brain works.
Well, and I think something you said about, if you look back and say, could I have achieved more?
Mhm.
If you really break it down, maybe it's could I achieve differently?
Yes.
And recognizing what that looks like.
Yeah.
I'm just picturing the curly haired you versus the straight haired you. And yes,
Yeah.
I fought it for years and now I'm too old to care.
Right.
Um,
And
but there's
oftentimes,
so much about life that is just compliance.
mhm,
And then is it truly what you desire?
right.
And what I'm hearing in you is you've gone through this on your journey and now you're really stepping into it.
Yeah.
Your feet are firmly planted. You know this is real. And you mentioned the social media. So now that you've stepped into it and
Mhm.
sharing it like you're doing with us today, that has to be very empowering for you
Oh, yes, it is.
and hopefully for other people as well.
Yes. Yes. And I will say, I'm it's probably a little bit my growing up third of four, but I always loved being the peacemaker. We had a joke growing up of like, oh, Katie's the favorite, and now my sister and I are like, oh, that's probably not healthy. That wasn't all that meant was that I was suppressing myself in order to not create any other waves. So I was learning how to mask at a very, very young age. And masking, if you're out there and you're a parent of kids, the trigger for me with my kids was like, oh no, your son is a delight to be in the classroom. And then when he gets home, you're like, is wrong with my child? But my youngest son is 14 now, and we'll be in the car going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and he interrupts me multiple times, but will say, I'm sorry to interrupt you again. And I said, it's okay, buddy. He's like, no, I know. I feel safe here. And it is that emotional safety that I feel like I'm giving people, or at least I try to
Yes.
give people by talking about it out loud. And so TikTok is an incredible place to live for me because everybody's a little messy on that app. And we're all a little worried about what's going to happen because no other social media is quite like it. Because even when I'm on LinkedIn, talking about how I do my marketing consulting business, which
Right.
I do it differently to work with my brain. Um, I will talk about marketing and I will talk about ADHD things, and there's still always a little fear, concern for me that I'm going to be judged in a certain way because I'm talking about my disability, my deficit, if you think about it in that way. And I think it's one of those challenges that many of us in our current age right now are middle managers to upper management. And we grew up in the time when it was really looked down upon and there was a huge stigma. And we're still getting through a lot of that. And maybe it'll always exist. But I just think if I keep talking about it, it will help others. And I know
Right.
it has because people have come to me on both platforms to say, thank you so much for sharing X, Y, or Z. Um, and that's really fulfilling to me because I just want to help people and connect them to resources because it's really challenging to try to navigate it. It's really overwhelming.
Well, and that's why we do this. That's
Yeah.
why we do connect the community because you don't know what you don't know. And, you've talked about it that so many people think I'm the only one
Yeah.
until you realize you're not the only one. And while it may be considered a difference and that difference is considered a disability, you've really found a way to take that and really be empowered by it. And I love that you've talked about your hyper focus, but that's your superpower.
Yes.
And I'm still waiting. We had talked a while ago. I'm waiting to see that super cape come out one of these days.
I know. I do. I should just let my youngest do it. He's pretty creative with the tech. So I would say, get me an AI caped Katie Crusader.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. Well,
Yeah.
let's talk about how you are already helping people. Now, you mentioned your logo, the circle and the square for Neuro Nuance, but realistically, what are the things that you are doing that could be a real resource to anybody that's watching us that's like, I don't know, that ADHD thing might be me.
Yeah. Well, first, I would say, please come to my TikTok account. And I'm sure we'll tag them and, maybe there'll be a
Yes.
little byline down here. It's my handle is Neuro Nuance because I think our neurology is nuanced. Nuanced? Ooh, a lot of R's. I didn't think that through. Neuro Nuance. Um, and then I'll be launching a website very quickly here. And that is neuronuancelife.com. So on there, I'm going to go through four, essentially, I call them four cliffs. And I
Okay.
sounds scary, but it's like you do kind of go over a cliff. Um, and that is you're looking at your life going, something is wonky here. I'm off and I'm not quite sure why. And that to me is you're trying to put your puzzle pieces together. And I'm going to go through the four and then I'll give you nuggets in each of them because
Sure.
I think they help lead to. So that's your puzzle piece moment where you're going to be doing your self-awareness and then you're going to start searching for answers. You might go to your doctor and say, here's kind of what I'm dealing with, or a behavioral health clinic
Okay.
and ask for a referral. That is another cliff because now you're like, okay, I've got a neuropsych assessment appointment. It is 8 months down the road, but I need some help and support now. That is kind of the waiting room, I call it. The next one is, all right, I went through my assessment, I got the feedback. Yes, I do have a diagnosis of some sort, which is clarity and chaos. Clarity means great, got a diagnosis. Chaos means crap. It starts over again. I've now got to navigate a new way of living. And once you do that, then you get to that place of what does my ADHDable life look like? And for me, as I rebuilt from having burnout from corporate life, that phrase, creating an ADHDable life to me it just came to me. And I couldn't believe that that nobody had gotten it yet. So I started using it. And what I am offering, you can see it on TikTok, and I've got some free resources there. And I also am a brain coach. So I do have a coaching program that is 93 minutes total, but because I know my brain, it's broken up into small chunks. And it's
Okay.
enough to get you from the first cliff all the way into the fourth cliff, where you're going to get information about your how the brain works. So you can, and then you reflect on yourself, information on how your values are versus what your brain values, how you can reflect back. So I always in the program like to give what's the neuroscience nugget, and then what's a cognitive coaching element that helps get you through those four cliffs and into the space where you're starting to craft out your own ADHDable life. So all of that you can right now find through my TikTok. I'm building Instagram, I'm building YouTube. I've got amazing grand plans for podcasts and newsletters, but those will probably be in the first quarter of 2025. So it's very exciting. I'm having a lot of fun, which is great because they always tell you, go find your passion, work your passion. And as someone who is multi-passionate, and every time I do air quotes, I'm just assuming everyone's going to go Google these phrases because it's phrases. But being a multi-passionate person can be really hard because we grow up being told you have to do one thing. You have to have one job. You have to And you just realize, actually, no, I can go explore things that I'm interested in. I'm an adult and I get to do those things.
Right.
So the one thing I could talk in and day out on is on ADHD and how our brain works. So I'm building my life, my professional life around that interest.
That's awesome. And
Yeah.
I think even if we're reaching parents of kids with ADHD, to recognize that as much as we want to help them, and some of that is help them focus, right?
Yeah.
That if we also recognize it doesn't have to be so super hyper focused to one thing, um, hopefully that helps everyone.
Yeah.
And also to recognize that interests do change over time. And as we grow into our grown up selves, maybe grown up,
Yeah. Hmm.
and finding those things. And like you said, you can be multi passionate because there can be more than one thing that really drives you. There's probably a connection,
Yeah.
but because underneath it all, you're still Katey, right?
Right.
Um,
Right.
but to find what those things are and how to share that with other people. And I think that that's awesome that you're doing that. Um, and I know that in doing all of these things, you've been developing things for yourself and your family and figuring out how those things can help other people. And you've developed, I guess, a graphical representation of some of the things that you need to consider along the way. So, can you tell me about your wheel?
Yes. Oh my gosh, I love my wheel. It's so funny. I'm like, oh, when did I talk about my wheel yet? Yes. I'm so glad you thought of it. Okay. So the wheel of modalities. Actually, I didn't do that right. This is stage, Katie. The wheel of modalities. Okay. So when my son was diagnosed, his neuropsych doctor said, I said, so how do you treat? And you should also note, anytime I'm doing air quotes, either A, go Google it because um, it's a term, or I'm doing air quotes because I don't quite like the word, but I don't have one that's quite perfect yet. So how do you treat ADHD? You don't cure it, but you can manage your symptoms to help you live an ADHDable life, which means not living in overwhelm, living with some peace, loving yourself, all those fun things. There's really five key areas, and he listed them off, and my eyes glazed over, and I wrote to myself, um, email him to ask for modalities on paper. This was me, I was writing as
Yeah.
I was looking down. So that's how one of my triggers for me is like, if you just talk at me, which I realize we're doing to your audience, I will probably glaze over and I'm going to miss stuff. So that's why I actively take notes, but at the end, my notes look like chaos. Anyway, the wheel of modalities. So there are five things that you can do in your life that can help you manage your ADHD symptoms. And they are your nutrition. I say it with an eye roll, right? It's not diet and exercise, it's not fitness, it's your nutrition. And the key one for me is, do I get protein enough in the morning? And am I drinking enough water? So that's number one. It's actually not number one. The reason I put it on a wheel is because you can pick any one of these. You don't have to do all five every day. So one of them is nutrition. One of them is exercise. Okay, you don't have to go work out for an hour,
Thank
but
you.
yes, if you just go walk for 10 minutes, that's all your brain needs to get engaged. And then the 30 minutes after are going to be some of your best cognitive brain performance minutes of the day. So I will set a timer for 5 minutes, walk out my front door, and when it goes off, I will come back. I won't even put my running shoes on. I have a pair of indoor Crocs and a pair of outdoor Crocs. It's great. Number three is mindfulness or meditation or therapy or all of the above. You could stick those all into one big bucket. When I'm feeling particularly overwhelmed, but I don't have a therapy session that day, there's a free 10-minute video on YouTube from the Calm app. It's called the 10-minute daily calm. And I will lay down and I will put my gravity weighted blanket over me and my noise canceling headphones, and I'll just listen to that. And it helps
Okay.
regulate your nervous system. That's three, right? Okay, good.
That's great.
Four is accommodations. I just talked about one of them, which is my noise canceling headphones. So accommodations are anything you do in life to make your life easier. And this is another video on TikTok that just went crazy. It's like at 400,000 views. And all I did was I took the comments from one other video where I said, here's the three things I do to make my work life easier. And all these people started flooding the comments on everything that they did. And so I went into it in hyperfocus and I just copied and pasted, copy and pasted. I had 5 pages filled of bullet points of different things that people do to make their lives easier. One of my favorites is a woman uses an IKEA hat rack. Like, think of an old, cool, I mean, IKEA is not old, but just a cool hat rack. And
Okay.
she said, I put that in the corner of my bedroom, and that's what I hang my clothes on at the end of the night. And that way they don't end up on my floor. Like, oh, the simplicity. And it's so creative. I love it so much. Okay. Another one was put hangers in your laundry room. Just hang stuff right up. I
Yep.
could go on and on for days about that video, but it's pinned at the top of my channel. So if you go there, you'll see it right away. And number 5 on the wheel of modalities is supplements or medications. Now, this is where I am not a medical doctor. I am just a, like I said, late diagnosed perimenopausal woman that goes into hyperfocus to learn things. So your medical doctor is the one that you can work with medications on for your ADHD symptoms. I highly recommend working with someone in behavioral therapy who is a medications management professional. Mine is a doctor. She's a nurse doctor practitioner, NDP, and she takes a functional approach. So she's looking at me as a whole person to say, what medication might be right for Katey? Because stimulants and non-stimulants are both used to treat ADHD symptoms, but not everybody can take stimulants, and non-stimulants don't always work. And what other symptoms is Katey experiencing? And then on the supplement side of it, a lot, there are some classic ones out there like omega-3s, excellent for your brain health and your cognitive performance. And there are a bunch of other ones that there is some research on for ADHD symptoms that I do work with her on, or even just stress response, because it's really challenging to manage your ADHD symptoms if your emotions and your stress response, your fight or flight, are engaged. Your body and your brain are like this, and you need to be calm. I'm going like this because your reactive brain is here and your emotional brain's in here. But this needs to be calm in order for this to work its best. So I try to do as much as I can to have a slow morning. Like imagine the mornings of chaos when my kids were young and you're all trying to get out the door and go to work and
Right.
um, those were the mornings when I forgot most things because I was in such a state of chaos and emotion. But now I know I can't have I can't have any meetings start before 10 a.m. And that is a luxury for me, and for many people right now, I understand. But also, if you have an ADHD diagnosis, you can go to your manager or your work to say, I'm seeking an accommodation. I cannot have any meetings before 10 a.m. I could start work before 10 a.m., but I can't have any meetings. And that means that I will, work later into the day, or my best working hours are afternoon and evening. So I always come back to these 5 modalities after I've gone, okay, circle in a square. What are my gaps? What's my excess? And then if I'm living in a gap, what can I do in my wheel of modalities to help me either manage that gap more effectively or help me come out of the excess before I go overboard. And there have been days when I wake up and I am really, really dragging, and I will look at my wheel, actually have it printed out in color. I drew it originally with crayon. And
I love that.
yep. And I will pick one thing from each of them and I'll go do them. And it might only take me a half hour to go do them all, but it's kind of like mentally resetting and knowing I've made tiny little investments into myself that day, which is kind of all my brain needs for a little hit of dopamine to keep going on to the next thing. And that is the wheel of modalities.
I love your wheel.
I do too.
And I love that it is a wheel. And like you said, it's not necessarily primary, secondary, tertiary. It is, there are all these things you can consider, and whatever is the thing you need to do right now.
Yeah.
I find, that's helpful. I also love that you're encouraging, um, I guess, physical and mental fitness
Mm,
without saying you need to go get a membership at the gym and work out so many hours and so on. I
yeah.
think that you are realistic about your approach, and that's going to help people way more than walking away from a doctor's office with 10 sheets of paper that tell you the things you should be doing that you either, I don't have time, I don't have life, I don't have ability, whatever it is. And you also used the word at some point about chunking things so
Yes.
that you manage what you can manage when you can manage it.
Right. And that's actually one of my favorite neuroscience nuggets is chunking, and you can Google that one, is actually something our brain does naturally. And it's how we manage data inside of our brain. And so when you chunk things in your life, and that's why I love a wheel, I love a square, I love buckets, I love boxes. And they're not necessarily always organized by any means, but I know where the thing is if I need to go access it. Um,
Fair?
and and finding things that are just simple to do. It's a version of atomic habits where you need 2 weeks to kind of create a new habit. You know how I feel about the word habits, though. But for instance, I asked my medications management gal. I said, okay, we've got my meds down, we've got my supplements down. I like to say I'm medicated and supplemented today. Let's go. And I'm doing better with getting my protein. I'm doing better with water. Now, what do I do on exercise? And I have such a hang up over it, which I'm an athletic person. I was athletic in high school, but like, ugh, I just have to exercise because it's good for me. That's no fun. Which is the ADHD talking. There's no dopamine in it. And she said, if I were you, all I would do is a 30-second plank every day. Get out of bed, or when you go into bed before the end of the night, a 30-second plank. It is full body, and you will be winded when you're done. And that's all I do some days. But I do it. Do I do it every day? No. But do I do it most days? Yes. And to me, I was like, yes, 30 seconds of working out and it's full body. So I
I
feel
love a
like a
30-second
doer.
workout.
I know, right? And my next one this year is because I'm perimenopausal, and now I'm worried about my bone density and I need to add muscle. So I'm going to get a weighted vest and I'm going to wear my weighted vest while I do my quick 10-minute walk. It's a twofer. Perfect. That's the dopamine hit I need. So,
I love it.
yeah, it's been really fun. And I don't discount for me that while I'm having fun, the people who are experiencing where I was 4 or 5 years ago, or the kids who are experiencing not knowing why the heck am I being shamed for not knowing how to do something when I'm 16, and I'm like, nobody showed me yet. I'm really mindful that it's hard, and that's why things like what you're doing and program or things like what you're doing, and honestly, social media, when you use it for good to enrich your life, can be really helpful.
Well, and that's my goal with all of this. None of us get through life alone,
No,
and there are things you learn along the way. So if you've learned something about ADHD that can help me or anybody that's watching this, we have shared a resource. And
yes,
that's what I want to do.
good.
No one should have to start from ground zero for everything. If somebody has already lived it, and found things like your wheel, I'd much rather go to Katey's wheel than have to figure out on my own what are the things I should be doing.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, especially if you're in this ADHD brain that you reference, I don't know that everybody has it in them to do all the research and to find all the things. But if you can start with a guide,
Mhm.
you started on this journey without a guide.
Yes.
And I really see you as being the guide now.
Yeah.
I now you've got your cape and your backpack, and you're marking those points for other people,
Yeah.
and that's very much appreciated. Thank
Oh,
you for all that you're doing.
yes. Well, like I said, it feels a little self-serving because I really am enjoying it, but my why is in the right place. I'm enjoying it because I'm helping others, and I've always been that way in my life, but never really known like, well, what's my biggest contribution? And this is part of it, is I'm a creative brainstormer. I love talking. I love talking with pictures. I'm really good at chunking and framing things and telling stories. So why don't I just put all those things together? So I thought for your audience too, there's two docs that I want to share that have my two of my frameworks, the circle and the square and the wheel, that they actually have a second page to them where they can work through it on their own.
Oh, that's
And
awesome.
we'll just anybody can have those.
I really appreciate you sharing them. And what we'll do is make those documents available through my website, outspoken.info. It'll be a downloadable PDF that anyone that is seeing this and saying, wow, I could use those tools, will make those tools available. So thank you so much for sharing those
Yeah.
with all of us.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Any final words of wisdom? What would be if you had to narrow it down, what would be the one thing you would want people to know about living an ADHDable life?
Yeah, that's I do love that, having an ADHDable life. And with my brain, there's never just one thing, but there's two.
Okay.
So, um, acceptance is a huge part of it. And the biggest part of acceptance for me was knowing that your ADHD brain is consistently inconsistent. And I even made myself a sweatshirt. It says consistently inconsistent. And the sooner you get to that level of acceptance, your shame will shrink. If you start talking about it more, your shame will shrink. And then as you shrink that shame, your confidence and your empowerment grow. So that's the one part about acceptance, is knowing that you are consistently inconsistent and you got everything that you have inside of you to be able to identify what you need to live in that space in a healthy way for yourself. The second thing I would want to leave people with is, and this is where I'm going to pause because I was just going to tell you what's the other thing. Matt's going to have to edit this out. This is classic ADHD as well. That I was like, I've got two things, and I could see both of the two things in my mind's eye. Oh, well, that's good. Now you won't hear we could edit out my computer talking to me. Consistently inconsistent. That was awareness. Oh, there you go. I got it. Maybe he won't want to edit this out. He should leave it in because that's really natural. That is how the brain works. Okay. The other thing I would leave you is you will see a lot of different ways that people talk about ADHD. It's a deficit, it's a disability. Do you have ADHD? My language, and anybody can use it, is I say, I have an ADHD brain. I have red hair. I have blue eyes. I have an ADHD brain. It is a feature of me as a human. And I like to say it that way. And my youngest son is like, doesn't bother me, mom. I say I have ADHD all the time. I'm like, cool, whatever works for you, man. But I like to say it that way because I think in part I grew up in the 80s and 90s when there was so much stigma around it, but also in part that it helps me feel like, okay, I'm the owner. I'm this, I'm the boss. I'm the CEO here, folks. And this one, Although sometimes it will feel like I'm being run by it. I have to remind myself that that consistent inconsistency is something that I own and that I can be in charge of. So I have an ADHD brain.
I love
I
it.
just know I know more
And
about myself.
and I think what you said about the way you put it and the way your son puts it, it again goes back to we're all unique and we're all going to experience it differently.
Yeah,
But whether it's I have an ADH brain or I have ADHD, it's still only one component of who you are as a person.
correct.
It does not define you.
Yes.
And all the stuff that you've told us today will help you to define it the way you want to.
Yes. 100%. Beautifully said.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.